I thank the Speaker, and I ask unanimous consent to speak for the time allotted.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank you. I rise to counter my good friend and indicate that this is important legislation. It's documented to be important legislation. And the documentation is clear because of the widespread support of such a wide range of Americans. I wanted to rise today on the floor to support S4003 and thank my colleagues, Senator Cornyn from Texas and my colleague, Congresswoman Bass. As this legislation came out of judiciary, as well, this is legislation that fits very well under the Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security, which I chair. Because our responsibilities are to address the question of crime, but also to address the question of social justice and reform. And we have heard over the last couple of months, many of us have been in the mode of campaigning, challenges against Democrats as to whether or not we're tough on crime, or whether or not we can work to protect our communities. Well, one thing that protects our communities is a strong law enforcement that knows how to engage with the community and is given the tools that will help them do so. And to help the community engage with law enforcement, that they can collectively solve crime. This legislation is a bipartisan bill that would improve public safety and strengthen public trust in law enforcement, one of the first stops toward bringing down crime. S4003 would require the Department of Justice to develop de-escalation training curriculum in consultation and collaboration with mental health providers, law enforcement agencies, civil rights organizations, and associations representing individuals with mental health diagnosis. How many times have mothers and fathers had to deal with the loss of a child because they were having a mental health episode? This legislation continues to be a need to improve the practices that law enforcement officers can use to reduce use of force incidences and also protect themselves. When individuals in crisis, police are often the first to respond. We understand that is not their total responsibility. But because of our lack of access to mental health resources, they have been on the front lines. And so without training necessary to recognize a mental health crisis, someone winds up injured or dead. Interactions between law enforcement and civilians can escalate to potentially deadly consequences. As the country faces an epidemic of violence committed by officers and the disproportionate impact that has this violence on people of color, we remember the lives lost to police violence, including Nicholas Chavez, who was killed by law enforcement, among others in cities across the land. Just this week, we learned that 2 Colorado deputies killed Christian Glass in June have been indicted. That was a sad circumstance. We wish it had not happened, and it did not need to happen. This legislation will give us the opportunity, again, to do what we want to do, to keep America safe, to bring down crime, and to protect our officers, and to give them the training that helps them to be able to engage in de-escalation training. Somewhat similar to the overall bill that we introduced, and I introduced, John Conyers before me, I introduced the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act, which I hope to reintroduce again, and seeking bipartisan support. This would authorize $70 million in annual grant funding for training that includes improving community officer relations and to engage in training on use of force or de-escalation scenario-based exercises. In addition, this bill would provide support to law enforcement agencies to train and equip officers. This legislation, of course, is widely supported.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the generated additional 30 seconds.
I thank the chairman. This legislation is widely supported. It is bipartisan. And I want to thank Mayor-elect Karen Bass, Congresswoman Bass, for her leadership on the companion bill. And I'd very much like to thank my colleague, Senator Cornyn, out of Texas, for his commitment and concern. I quickly want to acknowledge that the faith community is squarely in support of this, and they certainly care about law enforcement and bringing down crime. Catholic Charities, Catholic Prison Ministry, Jesuit Conference, National Association of Evangelicals, National Latino Evangelical, among others, CPAC, National Fraternal Order of Police, and any number of others whose letters I ask unanimous consent to place into the record. I ask my colleagues to support this legislation. I yield back.
Without objection, gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York, reserve.